Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the B segment of episode 68 of Codename Kids Next Door, Operation Hamster. We begin this segment with a scene from this segment's sibling segment, Operation Recess. It's the scene where the Sector V operatives are in their treehouse preparing for their mission to head to Gulliger Elementary School to save Recess. And Lizzie arrives, warning number one that he better not have forgotten about the date that he promised her. Shortly after the Sector V operatives and Lizzie leave through the elevator, most, if not all, of the hamsters in the Sector V treehouse gather together in the main control room to essentially throw a party. Eventually, the really incredibly destructive machine arrives just outside of the Sector V treehouse, captures all the hamsters in the main control room, and places them in a container. However, we soon see that the delightful children from down the lane are not the ones piloting the really incredibly destructive machine this time around. This time, the really incredibly destructive machine is being piloted by the delightful children's pet cats, the Sinister Felines from atop the Litterbox. Using a chalkboard, the Sinister Felines reveal that they intend to eat the hamsters, and the drawings on the chalkboard suggest that they are going to put them in pies or something along those lines at least. But before the Sinister Felines have a chance to actually set their plan into motion, they are ambushed by the Sector V operatives' hamster counterparts, also called the Hamsters Next Door. Eventually, the Sinister Felines are knocked out of the Sector V treehouse, and they land in a neighboring yard with a dog in it, and the dog proceeds to attack the Sinister Felines. After that, the majority of the segment is mostly dedicated to the Sinister Felines coming up with different plans to try and defeat the Hamsters Next Door, but the Hamsters Next Door continue to one-up the Sinister Felines, and it usually ends with the Sinister Felines, these different scenes usually end with the Sinister Felines being knocked back into that neighboring yard and the dog in that yard attacking them. Although there are a few times where the Sinister Felines actually land in the street, but they get run over by different vehicles, and in one case, a marching band steps all over them. And so a few examples of these different scenes include a trap and a cake. There's one scene that features number 4's hamster counterpart wearing a disguise to trick the Sinister Felines, and there's also a scene where dynamite is painted to look like soda, and then there's a whole montage of various other scenes throughout most of the segment. Eventually, though, it gets to the point where the Sinister Felines cover the Sector V treehouse in dynamite, and they do manage to capture the hamsters next door, and they've tied them up to some of the dynamite that's on the Sector V treehouse right now. But when the Sinister Felines activate the dynamite, they find out that the hamsters next door managed to actually reroute where the end of the fuse is. So the dynamite that explodes is not the dynamite on the Sector V treehouse, but rather dynamite that's been set up to all the dog houses in the neighborhood, or at least most of the dog houses in the neighborhood. This leads to, the explosions from the dog houses lead to the dogs landing in the streets where the Sinister Felines are, and so the Sinister Felines are chased away by the dogs. That's how that's how the Sinister Felines are defeated. And after that, though, the Hamsters Next Door are still tied up to some of the dynamite that's still attached to the Sector V treehouse. So they request help from another hamster to set them free. This other hamster doesn't know how to untie the rope that's keeping the Sector V operatives' hamster counterparts to the dynamite. So this hamster gets the idea to use a flamethrower instead, which naturally causes the dynamite to explode. So the Sector V treehouse has now exploded, and the hamsters are falling into the streets. They're falling into the streets now after the explosion happens. And while after that happens, the Sector V operatives are returning after completing their mission at Gulliger Elementary School to save recess, and they're surprised to see that the treehouse has now been destroyed. And when they see their hamster counterparts, they look at them very angrily, and some text appears on the screen to indicate that the hamsters are in trouble. Next up is the end credits scene, and in the end credits scene, number 1 is giving a speech about saving recess, while the 4 other Sector V operatives and some hamsters are answering phone calls that are coming from callers that are pledging their support to save recess. Number 1's speech, however, eventually becomes more and more unhinged, and it gets to the point where number 5 has to call someone to tell them that number 1 is doing it again, in her words. And so the screen changes to a message that says that there are technical difficulties, and they apologize for these technical difficulties. And that's how we end this segment. So there you go. This was the B segment for episode 68. And like I mentioned in the recap and thoughts video for Operation Recess, episode 68 is sort of similar to an episode from season 5 where both the A segment and the B segment tied into each other in some way. In the case of the season 5 episode, the segments Operation Virus and Operation Outbreak tied into each other because certain actions that happened in Operation Virus carried over into Operation Outbreak. So you could say that Operation Outbreak was like a indirect sequel to Operation Virus. That's how you could describe the relation between those two segments for that were part of that season 5 episode. In this case, in the case of this season 6 episode, episode 68, the A segment and the B segment tie into each other because the B segment is a midquel or an interquel for the A segment. That's to say, it's a story that takes place during the events of the other story. And Operation Hamster takes place during the events of Operation Recess, while the Sector V operatives are at Gulliger Elementary School trying to complete their Save Recess mission. And so, yes, we get to see what was going on at the Sector V treehouse while the Sector V operatives were away. And in one of his blog posts, Tom Warburton did acknowledge that this segment was meant to be a love letter to the Tom and Jerry shorts. I believe those were his words, or at least close enough, or along those lines anyway. But yes, he essentially said that this was a love letter to the Tom and Jerry shorts, and that was definitely very clear. I remember when I first watched this segment back when it first aired on TV, I immediately caught the Tom and Jerry reference, and I'm sure the same can be said for any other viewer I'm sure the same can be said for most other viewers. Although other viewers have pointed out that while Tom and Jerry was definitely the main reference for this particular segment, one could also see references to other similar franchises like Looney Tunes. I think I've seen someone suggest Screwy Squirrel references, and Looney Tunes was definitely another example that was brought up, more specifically the Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner shorts from the Looney Tunes franchise. But yes, Tom Warburton did clarify that it was mostly a love letter for Tom and Jerry, in his words, or along those lines at least. And yeah, I thought that was definitely a fun reference to the Tom and Jerry shorts. Except this time around, it wasn't mice that were going against cats. And another detail that's worth bringing up, with regards to the, this segment actually brings back the Hamsters Next Door, or the Sector V operatives' hamster counterparts. Yes, they actually first appeared back in the Season 1 segment, Operation Piano. And in another blog post, Tom Warburton did admit that he's surprised it took them until Season 6 to bring the Hamsters Next Door back and give them the spotlight. So that was pretty, but yeah, better late than never, I guess. And yeah, it was pretty cool. Although, I guess I should mention that the Hamsters Next Door do have slight differences in designs compared to when they appeared in Operation Piano. And number 4's counterpart actually was notably different. Yes, in Operation Piano, number 4's hamster counterpart was actually rather clever and came up with a really brilliant plan. Although number 4 ended up ruining that plan. In this segment, number 4's hamster counterpart looks a little more like number 4 in hamster form, and even acts more like number 4 too. So that was, number 4's counterpart was probably the most notable difference, but there were some other differences in appearances, at least in appearances when it came to the other Sector V operatives' hamster counterparts. Yes, this segment makes the hamster counterparts look more like their human counterparts, except in hamster form naturally. So, yeah, although number 4's counterpart also had a difference in personality to make him more in line with his human counterpart's personality. So, yeah, that was another detail I thought we should bring up. And we actually, yes, this segment also reveals that the Delightful Children have pets, pet cats, the Sinister Felines from atop the Litterbox. And yes, like the Delightful Children, the Sinister Felines have a hive mind. They have a hive mind approach. They all act. They act and talk in unison. Well, they mostly didn't talk. There was one scene, however, where the Sinister Felines did talk. The scene when they were fooled by number 4's hamster counterparts' disguise. That was the one time they talked. And that might have been a reference. Yes, I think that's referencing the Tom and Jerry scenes where Tom would fall for a disguise and he would start to talk, even though usually Tom and Jerry don't talk, bearing a few exceptions here or there. But yeah, that's probably what it was referencing, given the whole Tom and Jerry parody or affectionate homage or affectionate parody approach with this segment. Oh, and while I'm thinking of Tom and Jerry too, another difference I guess some would say is in this case we had an example of who was clearly in the right and who was in the wrong, or the good guys versus bad guys. Yes, because the Hamsters Next Door were clearly the good guys in this segment, while the Sinister Felines were clearly the bad guys. And I found that interesting because in the Tom and Jerry shorts, at least more recently, I've seen some fans actually debate over who they sympathize with more between Tom and Jerry. Yes, I've seen some fans consider Jerry to be a designated hero, while they see Tom to be a designated villain. And in the shorts, there were definitely cases where Tom definitely came off being the bad guy and Jerry being the good guy. But there were other cases where, Tom seemed more like the good guy, Jerry seemed more like the bad guy, but the shorts tried to make it seem like we should root for Jerry, even though Tom really came off being more sympathetic than the short intended. So I thought that was pretty interesting, or yeah, the shorts, or this segment kind of reminded me about that, how in the shorts, some fans actually debate over who they sympathize more between Tom and Jerry. While here, it was a little more, I guess you could say it was a little more cut and dry for this particular segment. And otherwise, what's another detail we can bring up? Yeah, that might actually be about it. I thought this was, yeah, that might be about it. So, or actually, yeah, I guess we should bring up that the whole Save Recess campaign. Yes, that's another thing to talk about. Yes, I had mentioned in the recap and thoughts video for Operation Recess that the idea of a story about saving recess was actually requested by the executives. Cartoon Network wanted to do a Save Recess campaign because some schools were thinking about cutting back on recess around that time, and so they requested that Tom Warburton and the rest of the staff and crew of Codename Kids Next Door come up with a story to go along with that Save Recess campaign. Now, of course, Operation Recess was the main focus, or yes, that idea was mostly focused in Operation Recess, but they still kind of referenced it in this segment, at least with the fact that it's a midquel or interquel to Operation Recess, and the end credits scene did have some of the, had the Sector V operatives and some hamsters answer calls for callers, answer calls from callers supporting the Save Recess campaign. And like I said, I think Operation Recess was a well-executed example of an entry that was requested by the executives. And yeah, and although we still did get references to that in this segment, but it also did lead us to a fun Tom and Jerry affectionate parody or homage. So yeah, I thought this episode overall was well executed with regards to being requested by the executives, but we also got a fun parody or homage entry too. So yeah, I definitely thought that episode 68 was a fun episode overall for Codename Kids Next Door. And I did think it was cool how both the segments did tie into each other, similar to the season 5 episode that had two segments that tied into each other, but they did it in a different way. Rather than being a small scene in one segment leading into the other in the sense of a indirect sequel, this one had featured a midquel or interquel. So again, like a similar idea but different approach. This kind of highlights why I think execution is key when it comes to stories. So otherwise, yeah, that might be about it now. I think we covered all the essentials. So yeah, I thought this was a fun Tom and Jerry parody or homage segment. And one could also argue a reference to other similar franchises like Looney Tunes or Screwy Squirrel. And it was pretty cool that we got to see at least an example of something going on at the Sector V treehouse while the Sector V operatives were away. It was pretty cool that we got to see the Hamsters Next Door again, and they actually got to have the spotlight in this segment compared to the relatively minor role they had in Operation Piano. Well, at least one of the operatives got a chance to shine in Operation Piano, but this time all 5 of them got their chance to shine. And it was pretty interesting that we got to meet the delightful children's pets, their pet cats, the Sinister Felines, and we find out that the Sinister Felines also have the hive mind approach that the delightful children have. And otherwise, I think they were able to pull off the midquel interquel idea very well with this segment and still had a lot of fun. So I would say that's it for now. So as of this video, we've now discussed the B segment for episode 68 of Codename Kids Next Door on this channel. Take care, and until next time.